to a general introduction to non-Aristotelian systems and general semantics, which begins with part 7 on the mechanism of time binding. And I'm going to read on abstracting on page 371. Chapter 24, on abstracting. To be an abstraction does not mean that an entity is nothing. It merely means that its existence is only one factor of a more concrete element of nature. Alfred North Whitehead. Aristotle, in building his theories, had at his disposal, besides his personal gifts, a good education according to his day and the science current in 400 to 300 BC. Even in those days, the Greek language was a very elaborate affair. Aristotle and his followers simply took this language for granted. The problem of the structure of language and its effect on semantic reactions had not yet arisen. To them, the language they used was the unique language. When I use the expression the language, I do not mean anything connected with the language as Greek. I mean only the structure of it, which was much similar in the other national languages of this group. The language Aristotle inherited was of great antiquity and originated in periods when knowledge was still more scanty. Being a keen observer and scientifically and methodologically inclined, he took this language for granted and systematized the modes of speaking. This systemization was called logic. The primitive structural metaphysics underlying this inherited language and expressed in its structure became also the philosophical background of this system. The subject-predicate form, the is of identity, and the elementalism of the Aristotelian system are perhaps the main semantic factors in need of revision, as they are found to be the foundation of the insufficiency of this system and represent the mechanism of semantic disturbances, making general adjustments in sanity impossible. These doctrines have come down to us, and through the mechanism of language and the semantic disturbing factors are forced upon our children. A whole procedure of training in delusional values was thus started for future generations. As the work of Aristotle was, at his date, the most advanced and scientific, quite naturally, its influence was widespread. In those days, no one spoke of this influence as linguistic, involving semantic reaction. Aristotle's work was, and still is, spoken of as philosophy, and we speak mostly of the influence of Aristotelian philosophy, rather than of the Aristotelian structure of language and its semantic influence. As we have already seen, when we make any proposition whatsoever, we involve creeds or metaphysics, which are embodied silently as structural assumptions and in our undefined terms. The use of terms not definable in simpler terms at a given date is inherent and seemingly unavoidable. When our primitive ancestors were building their language, quite naturally, they started with the lowest orders of abstraction, which are the most immediately connected with the outside world. They established a language of sensations. Like infants, they identified their feelings with the outside world and personified most of the outside events. This primitive semantic tendency resulted in the building of a language in which the is of identity was fundamental. If we saw an animal and called it dog, and saw another animal roughly resembling the first, we said quite happily, it is a dog, forgetting or not knowing that the objective level is unspeakable and that we deal only with absolute individuals, each one different from the other. Thus, the mechanism of identification or confusion of orders of abstractions, natural at a very primitive stage of human development, became systemized and structurally embodied in this most important tool of daily use called language. Having to deal with many objects, they had to have names for objects. These names were substantives. They built substantives, grammatically speaking, for other feelings which were not substantives, color, heat, soul. Judging by the lower order abstractions, they built adjectives and made a completely anthropomorphized world picture, speaking about speaking. Let us be perfectly aware from the beginning that when we make the simplest statement of any sort, this statement already presupposes some kind of structural metaphysics. The early vague feelings and savage speculations about the structure of this world, based on primitive, insufficient scientific data, was influencing the building of the language. Once the language was built and particularly systematized, these primitive structural metaphysics and semantic reactions had to be projected or reflected on the outside world, a procedure which became habitual and automatic. Was such a language structurally reliable and safe? If we investigate, we can easily become convinced that it was not. Let us take 3 pails of water. The first at the temperature of 10 degrees centigrade, the second at 30 degrees, and the third at 50 degrees. Let us put the left hand in the first pail and right in the third. If we presently withdraw the left hand from the first pail and put it in the second, we feel how nicely warm the water in the second pail is. But if we withdraw the right hand from the third pail and put it in the second, we notice how cold the water is. The temperature of the water in the second pail was practically not different in the 2 cases, yet our feelings registered a marked difference. The difference in the feel depended on the former conditions to which our hands had been subjected. Thus we see that a language of senses is not a very reliable language, and that we cannot depend on it for general purposes of evaluation. How about the term dog? The number of individuals with which anyone is directly acquainted is by necessity limited and usually is small. Let us imagine that someone had dealt only with good-natured dogs and had never been bitten by any of them. Next, he sees some animal. He says, "This is a dog." His associations or relations do not suggest a bite. He approaches the animal and begins to play with him and is bitten. Was the statement, "This is a dog," a safe statement? Obviously not. He approached the animal with semantic expectations and evaluation of his verbal definition, but was bitten by the nonverbal, unspeakable, objective level, which has different characteristics. Judging by present standards, knowledge in the days of Aristotle was very meager. It was comparatively easy 2,300 years ago to summarize the few facts known, and so to build generalizations which would cover those few facts. If we attempt to build a non-Aristotelian system, 1933, can we escape the difficulties which beset Aristotle? The answer is that some difficulties are avoidable, but that some are inherent in the structure of human knowledge and so cannot be entirely evaded. We can, however, invent new methods by which the harmful semantic effect of these limitations can be successfully eliminated. There is no escape from the fact that we must start with undefined terms which express silent structural creeds or metaphysics. If we state our undefined terms explicitly, we at least make our metaphysics conscious and public, and so we facilitate criticism, cooperation. The modern undefined scientific terms, such as order, for instance, underlie the exact sciences and our wider world outlook. We must start with these undefined terms as well as the modern structural world outlook as given by Science 1933. That settles the important semantic point of our structural metaphysics. It need hardly be emphasized that in a human class of life where creeds are characterized by having dates, they should always be labeled with this date. For sanity, the creeds utilized in 1933 should be the issue of 1933. Now, as to the structure of our language. What structure shall we give to our language? Shall we keep the old structure with all its primitive implications and corresponding semantic reactions? Or shall we deliberately build a language of new structure which will carry new modern implications and semantic reactions? There seems to be only one reasonable choice. For a non-aristotelian system, we must build a new language. We must abandon the is of identity, to say the least. We have already seen that we have an excellent substitute in an actional, behavioristic, operational, functional language. This type of language involves modern, asymmetrical implications of order and eliminates the is of identity, which always introduces false evaluation. To these fundamental starting points, we must add the principle that our language should be of non-elementalistic structure. With these minimum semantic requirements, we are ready to proceed. Let us take any object of ordinary experience. Let us say the one we actually call a pencil, and let us briefly analyze our nervous relationship to it. We can see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, and use it in different ways. Is any of the relationships just mentioned in all embracing one, or is our acquaintance through any of them only partial? Obviously, each of these means provides an acquaintance with this object, which is not only partial, but is also specific for the nerve centers which are engaged. Thus, when we look at the object, we do not get odor or taste stimuli, but only visual stimuli. If the object we call pencil were lying on the surface of this paper and we were to look at it along the surface of the paper in a perpendicular direction to its length, it would generally be seen as an elongated object pointed at one end, but if we were to observe it along the plane of the paper at right angles to our former direction, it would be seen as a disc. This illustration is rough, but serves to show that the acquaintance derived through any specific means, e.g. vision, is also partial in another sense. It varies with the position of any specified observer, Smith, or a camera. Furthermore, any given means provides for different observers different acquaintances. Thus, vision shows the pencil to one observer, Smith, as a pointed rod, and to another observer, Jones, as a disc. Feeling through other receptors is just as dependent upon many conditions, and different observers receive different impressions. This is well illustrated by the familiar tale of the 5 blind men and the elephant. Because of differences in sensitivity in the receptors of Smith's and Brown's, partial color blindness, astigmatism, farsightedness, any given means of acquaintance, e.g. vision, gives to different observers different reports of the one object. The acquaintance is thus personal and individual. Again, the reports received through particular channels are influenced by the kinds of reports that have already come through that channel. To one who has not seen trees frequently, a spruce and a balsam are not seen to be different. They are just evergreens. With better educated seeing, this individual later differentiates perhaps 4 kinds of spruce. Because of this factor of experience, the responses of each individual to similar external stimuli is individual. We can only agree on colors, shapes, distances by ignoring the fact that the effects of the same stimulus is different in different individuals. Besides that, we have no accurate means of comparing our impressions. The time factor enters in that we cannot become acquainted with our pencil on all sides at once, nor can we observe the outer form and the inner structure at the same time. We may even neglect to examine the inner structure entirely. Even more important is the fact that all our means together give us only a partial and personal acquaintance with the pencil. Continually, we invent extra neural means which reveal new characteristics and finer detail. Nor is this process ever completed. No one can ever acquire a complete acquaintance with even so simple an object as a pencil. The chemistry, the physics, the uses of the varieties offer fields of acquaintance that can be extended indefinitely. Nature is inexhaustible. The events have infinite numbers of characteristics, and this accounts for the wealth and infinite numbers of possibilities in nature. I use the word acquaintance deliberately because it seems vague, and as yet elementalistic gambling on words have not spoiled this term. I had to avoid the elementalistic terms senses and mind as much as possible in the analysis. If we recall the example of paper roses in the case of hay fever, we shall realize that the terms senses and mind are not reliable, particularly in humans. As a further instance, we have but to remember the experiment with newspaper headlines, also cited earlier. We become better acquainted with the objects by exploring it in manifold ways and building for ourselves different pictures, all partial and supplied by direct or indirect contact with different nerve centers. In these explorations, different nerve centers supply their specific responses to the different stimuli. Other higher nerve centers summarize them, eliminate weaker details, and so on. Gradually, our acquaintance becomes fuller while yet remaining specific and partial, and the semantic problems of evaluation, meanings, begin to be important. If we try to select a term which would describe structurally the processes which are essential for our acquaintance with the object, we should select a term which implies non-allness and the specificity of the response to the stimuli. If we pass from such a primitive level to a level of 1933 and inquire what we actually know about an object and the structure of its material, we find that in 1933 we know positively that the internal structure of materials is very different from what we gather by our rough senses on the macroscopic level. It appears of a dynamic character and of an extremely fine structure, which neither light nor the nerve centers affected by light can register. What we see is structurally only a specific statistical mass effect of happenings on a much finer grained level. We see what we see because we miss all the finer details. For our purpose, it is usually enough to deal only with sight. This simplifies writing, and the comments made apply to all other senses, though perhaps in different degrees. In 1933, in our human economy, we have to take into account at least three levels. The one is the submicroscopic level of science, what science knows about it. The second is the gross macroscopic daily experience level of rough objects. The third is the verbal level. We must also evaluate an important semantic issue, namely the relative importance of these three levels. We know already that to become acquainted with an object, we must not only explore it from all possible points of view and put it in contact with as many nerve centers as we can, as this is an essential condition of knowing, but we must also not forget that our nerve centers must summarize the different partial abstracted specific pictures. In the human class of life, we find a new factor, non-existent in any other form of life, namely, that we have a capacity to collect all known experiences of different individuals. Such a capacity increases enormously the number of observations a single individual can handle, and so our acquaintance with the world around and in us becomes much more refined and exact. This capacity, which I call the time-binding capacity, is only possible because, in distinction from the animals, we have evolved or perfected extraneural means by which, without altering our nervous system, we can refine its operation and expand its scope. Our scientific instruments record what ordinarily we cannot see, hear. Our neural verbal centers allow us to exchange and accumulate experiences, although no one could live through all of them, and they would soon be forgotten if we had no neural and extraneural means to record them. Again, the organism works as a whole. All forms of human activities are interconnected. It is impossible to select a special characteristic and treat it in a delusional, elementalistic isolation as the most important. Science becomes an extraneural extension of the human nervous system. We might expect the structure of the nervous system to throw some light on the structure of science, and vice versa. The structure of science might elucidate the working of the human nervous system. This fact is very important semantically and usually is not sufficiently emphasized or analyzed enough. When we take these undeniable facts into account, we find the results already reached to be quite natural and necessary, and we understand better why an individual cannot be considered entirely sane if he is wholly ignorant of scientific method and structure, and so retains primitive semantic reactions. For a theory of sanity, all three levels are important. Our senses react as they do because they united as a whole in one living structure, which has potentialities or capacities for the language in science. If we inquire what we do in science, we find that we observe silently and then record our observations verbally from a neurological point of view. We abstract whatever we and the instruments can, then we summarize, and finally we generalize, by which we mean the processes of abstracting carried further. In our acquaintance with daily objects, we do substantially a similar thing. We abstract whatever we can, and according to the degree of intelligence and information we have, we summarize and generalize. From the psychophysiological point of view, the ignorant is neurologically deficient. But to know or to believe something which is false to facts is still more dangerous and akin to delusions, as psychiatry and daily experience teach us. It is a neurological fallacy to treat science in isolation and disregard its psychophysiological role. In the building of our language, a similar neurological process becomes evident. If we were to see a series of different individuals whom we might call Smith, Brown, Jones, we could, by a process of abstracting the characteristics, segregate the individuals by sizes or colors, then by concentration on one characteristic and disregarding the others. We could build classes or higher abstractions, such as whites, blacks. Abstracting again with rejection of the color difference, we would finally reach the term man. This procedure is general. Anthropological studies show clearly how the degree of culture among primitive peoples can be measured by the orders of the abstractions they have produced. Primitive languages are characterized particularly by an enormous number of names for individual objects. Some savage races have names for a pine or an oak, but have no tree, which is a higher abstraction from pines or oaks. Some other tribes have the term tree, but do not have a still higher abstraction, woods. It does not need much emphasis to see that higher abstractions are extremely expedient devices. There is an enormous economy which facilitates mutual understanding and being able to be brief in a statement and yet cover wider subjects. Let us consider a primitive statement. I have seen tree 1, followed by a description of the individual characteristics. I have seen tree 2, with minute individual description where tree 1, tree 2 stand for names of the individual trees. If an event of interest had happened in a place where there were 100 trees, it would take a long while to observe fairly well the individual trees, and still no longer to give an approximate description of them. Such a method is non-expedient, fundamentally endless. The mechanism is cumbersome, involves many irreverent characteristics, and it is impossible to express in a few words much that might be important. Progress must be slow. The general level of development of a given race or individual must be low. It should be noticed that the problem of evaluation enters at once, implying many most important psychological and semantic processes. Similar remarks apply to the abstracting of infants, mentally deficient grown-ups, and some mentally ill. Indeed, as the reader of my Manhood of Humanity already know, the human class of life is chiefly differentiated from animals by its rapid rate of progress through the rapid rate of accumulation of past experiences. This is possible only when expedient means of communication are established. That is, when higher and higher orders of abstractions are worked out. Morphic resonance. All scientific laws and other generalizations of higher order, even single words, are precisely such methods of expediency and represent abstractions of very high order. They are uniquely important because they accelerate progress and help the further summarizing and abstracting of results achieved by others. Naturally, this process of abstracting has also unique practical consequences. When chemical elements were permanent and immutable, or physics and chemistry were much undeveloped. With the advent of higher abstractions, such as the monastic and general dynamic theories of all matter and electricity, unitary field theories, the creative freedom of science, and the control over nature have increased enormously and will increase still more. Psychiatry also seems to give data indicating that mental illnesses are connected either with arrested development or with regression to phylogenetically older and more primitive levels, all of which, of course, involves lower order abstractions. From the point of view of a theory of sanity, a sharp differentiation between man and animal becomes imperative, for with man, the lack of knowledge of this difference may lead to the copying of animals, which would involve semantic regression and ultimately become a mental illness. Although organisms have had acquaintance with objects for many hundreds or thousands of millions of years, the higher abstractions which characterize man are only a few hundreds or thousands of years old. As a result, the nervous currents have a natural tendency to select the older, more traveled nervous paths. Education should counteract this tendency, which, from a human point of view, represent regression or underdevelopment. By now, we know how important it is for a non-aristotelian system to abandon the older implications and adopt an actional, behavioristic, operational, or functional language. On the neurological level, what the nervous system does is abstracting, of which the summarization and integration are only special aspects. Hence, I select the term abstracting as fundamental. The standard meaning of abstracting, implies selecting, picking out, separating, summarizing, deducting, removing, omitting, disengaging, taking away, stripping, and as an adjective, not concrete. We see that the term abstracting implies structurally and semantically the activities characteristic of the nervous system and so serves as an excellent functional physiological term. There are other reasons for making the term abstracting fundamental, which from a practical point of view are important. A bad habit cannot be easily eliminated except by forming a new semantic counter-reaction. All of us have some undesirable but thoroughly established linguistic habits and semantic reactions which have become almost automatic, overloaded with unconscious emotional evaluation. This is the reason why new non-systems are, in the beginning, so extremely difficult to acquire. We have to break down the old structural habits before we can acquire the new semantic reactions. The non-Euclidean geometries are the non-Newtonian systems are not any more difficult than the older systems were. Perhaps they are even simpler. I'm sorry. I just thought of something. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Right. So the main semantic difficulty for those accustomed to the old consists in breaking the old structural linguistic habits and becoming once more flexible and receptive in feelings and in acquiring new semantic reactions. Similar remarks apply in a more marked degree to a non-Aristotelian system. The majority of us have very little to do directly with non-Euclidean or non-Newtonian systems, although indirectly we all have a good deal to do with them. But all of us live our immediate lives in a human world still desperately Aristotelian. Hence, a non-Aristotelian system, no matter what benefits it may give, is much handicapped by the old semantic blockages. In building such a system, this natural resistance or persistence of the old semantic reaction must be taken into consideration and, if possible, counteracted. One of the most pernicious bad habits which we have acquired emotionally from the old language is the feeling of allness, of concreteness, in connection with the is of identity and elementalism. One of the main points in the present non-Aristotelian system is first to remove entirely from our semantic reactions this allness and concreteness, both of which are structurally unjustified and lead to identification, absolutism, dogmatism, and other semantic disturbances. Usually the term abstract is contrasted with concrete, which is connected with some vague feeling of allness. By making the functional term abstracting fundamental, we establish a most efficient semantic counter-reaction to replace the older terms which had such vicious structural implications. Indeed, it is comparatively easy to accept the term abstractions of different orders, and anyone who does so will see how much clarity and how much semantic balance he will automatically acquire. From a non-elementalistic point of view, the term abstracting is also very satisfactory. The structure of the nervous system is in ordered levels, and all levels go through the process of abstracting from the other levels. The term implies a general activity not only of the nervous system as a whole, but even of all living protoplasm, as already explained. The characteristic activities of the nervous system, such as summarizing, integrating, are also included by implication. If we wish to use our terms in the strictly non-elementalistic way, we must abandon the older division of physiological abstractions, which implies body and of mental abstractions, which in turn implies mind, both taken in an elementalistic way. We can easily do that by postulating abstractions of different orders. We should notice that the above use of the term abstracting differs from the old usage. The semantic difference is in uniting all the abstractions our nervous system performs under the one term, and in distinguishing between different abstractions by the order of them, which is functionally as well as structurally justified. The term first order abstractions, or abstractions of lower orders, does not distinguish body and mind. Practically, it corresponds roughly to senses or immediate feelings, except that by implication it does not eliminate mind. Neither does the term abstractions of higher orders eliminate body or senses, although it corresponds roughly to mental processes. From the point of view of order, the term abstracting has a great deal in its favor. We have seen that serious structural and semantic importance the term order has, and how the activity of the nervous system has to be spoken of in terms of order. If we establish the term abstracting as fundamental for its general semantic implications, we can easily make the meanings more definite and specific in each case by having abstractions of different orders. We have seen also that the terms we select should involve environment by implication. It is not difficult to see that the term abstracting implies abstracting from something, and so involves the environment as an implication. The term abstractions of different orders is in this work as fundamental as the term time binding was in the author's earlier Manhood of Humanity. Hence, it is impossible to be comprehensive about it at this stage. More will be forthcoming as we proceed. But we have already come to some important semantic results. We have selected our structural metaphysics and decided that in 1933 we should accept the metaphysics of 1933, which is given exclusively by science. We have decided to abandon the false to facts is of identity and to use instead the best available language, namely an actional, behavioristic, functional, operational language based on order. And finally, we have found a term which is functionally satisfactory and has the correct structural and neural implications, and which represent a non-elementalistic term, and of which the meanings can be expanded and refined indefinitely by assigning to them different orders. In passing on to the general scientific outlook, similar structural remarks upon a non-elementalistic point of view apply and are semantically of importance. Because of the non-elementalistic character of the work of the writers on the Einstein and the new quantum theories, which much use is made of this material in the present work. There is a marked structural, methodological, and semantic parallelism between all modern non-elementalistic strivings, which are extremely effective psychologically. More material on this subject is given in parts 9 and 10. Now, returning to the analysis of the object which we called pencil, we observe that in spite of all similarities, this object is unique, is different from anything else, and has a unique relationship to the rest of the world. Hence, we should give the object a unique name. Fortunately, we have already become acquainted with the way mathematicians manufacture an endless array of individual names without unduly expanding the vocabulary. If we call the given object pencil 1, we could call another similar object pencil 2. In this way, we produce individual names and so cover the differences. By keeping the main root word pencil, we keep the implications of daily life and also of similarities. The habitual use of such a device is structurally and semantically of extreme importance. It has already been emphasized repeatedly that our abstracting from physical objects or situations proceed by missing, neglecting, or forgetting that those disregarded characteristics usually produce errors in evaluation, resulting in the disasters of life. If we acquire this extensional mathematical habit of using special names for unique individuals, we become conscious not only of the similarities but also of the differences, which consciousness is one of the mechanisms for helping the proper evaluation and so preventing or eliminating semantic disturbances. We now have before us a unique object which we call by a unique name pencil 1. If we inquire what science 1933 has to say about this object, we find that this object represents structurally an extremely complex dynamic process. For our purpose, which is intuitive, it is of little importance whether we accept the object as made up of atoms and the atom is made up of whirling electrons, or whether we accept the newer quantum theory as given in part 10, according to which the atom is formulated in terms of electrons, but the electron is the region where some waves reinforce each other instead of being a bit of something. It is of no importance from our point of view whether the atoms are of a finite size or whether they extend indefinitely. and are noticeable to us only in the regions of reinforcement of the waves. Naturally, this last hypothesis has a strong semantic appeal, since it would account, when worked out, for many other factors such as fullness and in non-elementalistic language, but probably it would necessitate a postulation of some sub-electronic structures. What is important for our semantic reaction is that we realize the facts that the gross macroscopic materials with which are familiar are not simply what we see, feel, but consist of dynamic processes of some extremely fine structure, and that we realize further that our senses are not adapted to register these processes without the help of extraneural means and higher order abstractions. Let us recall in this connection the familiar example of a rotary fan, which is made up of separate radial blades, but which, when rotating with a certain velocity, gives the impression of a solid disk. In this case, the disk is not reality, but a nervous integration or abstraction from the rotating blades. We not only see the disk be where there is no disk, but if the blades rotate fast enough, we could not throw sand through them, as the sand would be too slow to get through before being struck by one of the blades. The disk represents a joint phenomenon of a rotating blades, and of abstracting power of our nervous system, which registers only the gross macroscopic aspect of slow velocities and not the finer activities on subtler levels. We cannot blame the finite mind for the failure to register the separate blades, because physical instruments may behave similarly. For instance, the illustrations A and B are photographs of a small fan, which I use in lectures, and the photographic camera also missed the rotating blades and registered only a disk in figure 1b. Something roughly similar may be assumed for our purpose as going on in what we usually call materials. These are composed of some dynamic fine-grained processes, not unlike the rotating blades of our example, and what we register is the disk, be it a table or a chair or ourselves. For a similar reason, we may assume that we cannot put our finger through a table as our finger is too thick and too slow, and that for some materials it takes X-rays to be agile enough to penetrate. The above analogies are helpful for our purpose only, but are oversimplified and should not be taken as a scientific explanation. The neural process seems to be very general, and in all our daily experiences, the dynamic fine structures are lost to our rough senses. We register disks, although investigation discovers not disks but rotating blades. Our gross macroscopic experience is only a nervous abstraction of some definite order. As we need to speak about such problems, we must select the best language at our disposal. This ought to be non-elementalistic and structurally the closest to facts. Such a language has been built and is to be found in new quantum. Such a language has been built and is to be found in the differential and four-dimensional language of space and time, and in the Such a language has been built and is to be found in the differential and four-dimensional language of space-time and in the new quantum mechanics. In practice, it is simple to ascribe to every point of space a date, but it takes some training to get this semantic reaction. The language of space-time is non-elementalistic to the new notion of a point in space-time, such a point always having a date associated with it, and hence never identical with any other point. The name of point even or simply event has been given. How to pass from points Point events to extended macroscopic events is a problem in mathematical logic. Several quite satisfactory schemes have been given into the details of which we do not need to enter here, as the non-elementalistic structure of the language of space-time appears different from the older elementalistic language of space and time. Quite obviously, the old term matter, which belonged to the descriptive apparatus of space and time, should be abandoned also, and the bits of material we dealt with should be referred to by structurally new terms. In fact, we know that the old term matter can be displaced by some other term connected with the curvature of space-time. There is on record a striking example of what the structure of a form of representation means. In a paper printed in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, February 1926, Professor G.Y. Reinach, the mathematician, tried to introduce mass into space-time, the terms belonging to forms of representation of different structure. He succeeded, but at the price of splitting space-time into the original space and time. This is, as far as my knowledge goes, the first proof of how intimately a form of representation is inwardly and structurally interconnected. This fact is of extraordinary semantic importance for psychologicians and psychiatrists who always study symbolism of some sort. It would be of great interest to have such problems worked out by them. As abstracting in many orders seems to be a general process found in all forms of life, but particularly in humans, it is of importance to be clear on this subject and to select a language of proper structure. As we already know, we use one term, say apple, for at least 4 entirely different entities, namely 1, the event or scientific object, or the submicroscopic physico-chemical processes; 2, the ordinary object manufactured from the event by our lower nervous centers; 3, the psychological picture probably manufactured by the higher centers; and 4, the verbal definition of the term. If we use a language of adjectives and self-predicate forms pertaining to sense impressions, we are using a language which deals with entities inside our skin and characteristics entirely non-existent in the outside world. Thus, the events outside our skin are neither cold nor warm, green nor red, sweet nor bitter, but these characteristics are manufactured by our nervous system inside our skins as responses only to different energy manifestations, physical-chemical processes. When we use such terms, we are dealing with characteristics which are absent in the external world and build up an anthropomorphic and delusional world non-similar in structure to the world around us. Not so if we use a language of order, relations, or structure, which can be applied to submicroscopic events, to objective levels, to semantic levels, and which can also be expressed in words. Using such language, we deal with characteristics found or discovered on all levels, which give us structural data uniquely important for knowledge. The ordering on semantic levels, in the meantime, abolishes identification. It is of extreme importance to realize that the relational attitude is optional and can be applied everywhere and always once the above-mentioned benefits are realized. Thus, any object can be considered as a set of relations of its parts, Any sense perception may be considered as a response to a stimulus, which again introduces relations. As relations are found in the scientific sub-microscopic world, the objective world, and also in the psychological and verbal worlds, it is beneficial to use such a language because it is similar in structure to the external world and our nervous system, and it is applicable to all levels. The use of such a language leads to the discovery of invariant relations, usually called laws of nature, gives us structural data which make the only possible content of knowledge, and eliminates also anthropomorphic, primitive, and delusional speculations, identifications, and harmful semantic reactions.